mean, we know fundamentally human beings are asleep. We're running on automatic. We talk about AI, but we run on 95% of our operation is unconscious.
Welcome to Project Flux, your go-to podcast for exploring the impact of artificial intelligence on project delivery and productivity. And we've got an exciting episode lined up for you today. First, we'll be diving into the latest updates on Google's Notebook LM, exploring its newest features and how they can revolutionize productivity. We'll also cover some of the hottest tech stories making waves this week. But that's not all. We have a great interview with our special guest, Philip Crocker. Philip is an executive coach and OKR specialist with over 20 years of experience. He's dedicated to helping leaders and organizations unlock their full potential through strategic goal setting and critical thinking. As the managing director of Darwin Whitty and a strategic partner at Vima, he's uniquely positioned to discuss the intersection of AI and organizational performance. In our interview, Philip shares his insights on how AI will impact OKRs and how it can enhance goal setting, making it more precise, effective, and aligned with the needs of modern organizations. Before we dive in, a big shout out to our sponsor, Construct AI. If you're looking to boost your workflow with cutting-edge AI technology, look no further. You can trial this amazing software by clicking on the link in the show notes. So, stay tuned and let's dive in.
Today we have, as well as Yoshi, we have Rithwik with us, who's a data scientist, to talk about some of the big stories this week before we get into the interview. So how are you, Rithwik?
I'm good. Really excited to finally be a part of this.
And Yoshi, how are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm slightly concerned that I now might be the third best talker in the group, so...
Or maybe even the fourth. There's only three of us. It's all right. I'm sure Rithwik will put us all to shame with his capabilities. But we thought it was quite useful to get your view, Rithwik, on the big story in the newsletter this week, which was around Notebook LM, which has been out for a little while, but I've only had a chance to play with it recently. And it's quite different. It's quite a different proposition from the other large language models. What was your first impressions of it, Rithwik?
So initially I thought it was something, very similar to a custom GPT which ChatGPT has. But then, looking into it much more, it does not hallucinate as much because it's more like, a horse with stilts. It just looks ahead. So I tried to ask it questions which were unrelated to the document which I uploaded, those kind of things. And
you tried to break it, yeah?
Try to break it. I tried to understand how it's thinking and how it's getting the information from. I even, it's also, more of, it initially analyzes your query. It, refers to all your conversations and the documentation, those kind of things. But it does not tell you who it is, unlike ChatGPT. You can say, I'm GPT 3.5. It does not say, I'm Gemini, those kind of things. I try to understand how it retrieves information from the documents, even that does not tell me anything.
So it's a bit opaque, is it, with the way that it...
Yeah. It is. And
It's quite opaque, though, because I think that this is still in an experimental phase, right? And it's built by a small team within Google. So I think they've kind of got a bit of a black box so they can not release too much information as to how they're doing it.
Yeah.
While also, and I think that kind of balances expectations if they do that.
Yeah. And I also think, this is a big, area of research within large language models that they still struggle to read images, to read, other kind of documents. So I just uploaded a document which had images, charts in it. So it couldn't pick up any of the charts. It's just the text within
But you did break it then. we can always rely on Rithwik to break things. But I find the whole thing. I mean, for me, I think it's useful in a few contexts, right? So if I look at it from people who've got learning difficulties, perhaps as a way of studying or a way of learning. The traditional way is quite difficult. The fact that you can upload these things and you can create a study guide, or you can create a briefing note, or you can create, and I think this is the most exciting feature, a little podcast, means that those people who find it hard to sit down and read through loads of text can digest information in a different way. So from kind of project delivery point of view, say you've got tons of documents that you've got to read before you go into a meeting, you just don't have the time. Simple use case, you can upload it to Notebook LM, create a podcast that you can then listen to on the train as you go and get the gist of it. So it's trying to find ways that it'll be useful. Did you have a chance to play with it, Yoshi?
Yeah, I've had a chance to play with it. It's really interesting because we covered the OpenAI O1 model last week, and we kind of discussed, James, there's a sticking point where AI is rapidly advancing so quickly, but people ran out of questions to actually ask the model to actually test capability. And why that's kind of relevant is when I saw Notebook LM, I know it's been out for a while, but they released these new features. For me, it bridges that gap from AI running away too fast. It allows people to adopt the technology. I think it's more frictionless. And it's quite basic in the sense that it's kind of, I think someone on Twitter called it talk to your documents technology. And it's powered by Gemini, so it's AI powered. It's basically a virtual AI powered notebook. So if you're using things like Evernote, OneNote, you could use that, but you can leverage its AI capability. The cool thing, like you mentioned, Rithwik, and James, you kind of touched on, is its source integration, right? So it connects, if you're within the Google ecosystem, it's really good at putting that information and it's less likely to hallucinate.
I found one of the things that it does do is if you've got more than one source, it does sometimes get confused between the different sources. There's something that Anthony Slumbers brought up to me as well, who was on the show a while ago. And I guess they can get away with that because they're calling it experimental at the moment.
Yeah. And there could be a good comparison between the O1 model and the Gemini, the Notebook LM model, how it works. And I think I read this somewhere that OpenAI has asked people to be more cautious with their pipeline of the retrieval augmented generation, because while using the newer models like the O1 model, because the model also uses up tokens for thinking and trying to understand, the reasoning capabilities. And Gemini can do it because it's not doing the reasoning and reflection processes. But
not yet.
But this is an interesting point for me then, right? Because when I was kind of looking, so if you look at some of the features, right? One thing that I saw really was that the text is multilingual, but the audio feature apparently is only available within English. So it has got that limitation from what I've seen, even though, it's available in over 200 countries, et cetera, et cetera. And because so it's in this experimental phase, right? Which is great because you can learn, they can adapt new things. Con of this is that Google are known for building products and then ditching products, right? So Notebook LM is free because it's experimental, it's in this beta testing version. But if people move over and start to use this and they put the documentation within this repository for them to be able to query and get information back, if they just ditch it, it's going to be very difficult to then migrate over. So people will be quite hesitant. Equally, if you're putting information within this model itself and using it with Notebook LM, how do you know they're not collecting your data? Because they're saying they're not collecting your data, but equally it's free so you can use it. And they're doing that for a reason, right? Because they want the intelligence, they want to see the insights. So I'm not too sure about the security behind it, but they are saying they're not using it to train their models.
I believe that. I'll see it. But look, I think it's worth a play around with. I can certainly see it as another, and as I said a few weeks ago, it's another tool in our toolbox, isn't it, of AI? I think there's not one tool that does everything. Now we've got ChatGPT with the O1 for the reasoning. You've got Perplexity if you want sort of citations and good research. And now you've got Notebook LM when you want to sort of create some kind of frequently asked questions or a briefing note or a podcast. I mean, so it's just another tool in the ever-expanding universe of AI tools.
It feels like it's going to be the next step beyond. So once you have all your information, all your research from Perplexity and ChatGPT, and you create your own knowledge base of things that you want to look back at, that's when it's really good to leverage Notebook LM. So I think you use it after you start to use some of the other things.
Yeah. And it's, as you said, it's only two voices at the moment. They're both American accents. So at the moment, there's three of us. That's why we've got Rithwik on this call, because we can currently beat Notebook LM with having three voices. How long that will last for, I don't know. But going on to another story in the newsletter, which I thought was worth discussing was Slack's Workforce Lab research, where they looked at different personas of users. And I'm always interested in this because I get very different kind of responses to people that use AI. And they've identified 5 different AI personas that employers need to understand. They called the first one the maximalist, which is people using multiple AI multiple times a week to improve their work, shouting from the rooftops about it. That's probably the 3 of us, right? We're probably maximalists. Then you've got the underground. The undergrounds are the maximalists in disguise. They're using AI, but they're hesitant to share it. And I think there's more of those than we know, because there's still a stigma attached to it. Like, oh, I'm not going to tell people I'm using AI. They may think I'm cheating, or they may think I'm slacking. So
and that goes back to the research topic that you guys spoke about previously.
Yeah. I mean, this is for this kind of underlines that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Then you've got the rebel. The rebels, they don't subscribe to the AI hype. They're the ones who say this is all hype. I've heard it all before. They avoid using AI and consider it unfair when their co-workers engage with these tools. Those people are probably the reason the undergrounds are the underground, because they've got the rebels telling them that it's all hype. Then you've got the super fans. So the super fans are excited and they really admire the advances in AI, but aren't yet making the most use out of it. So those are probably the people that have used it, and they're using it just to kind of write emails. They probably know there's more to it, but they don't know where to go. And then the last one's the observer. And funny enough, 16% of people were the observer. So observers have yet to integrate AI into their work, and they're just watching with interest and caution, probably more with caution than interest. So do you think that sums it up about right? Rithwik?
Yeah, it would be interesting to understand the age groups as well for each of them, because to understand who are the observers and what age group are they from.
What would you expect? What would you expect across the demographic?
I think older would be, lesser.
Do you think less hands-on, more the observers and the super fans? That's typically what I think. I think you need to be driven, but this is kind of this is the bit that I find quite difficult though, because if you have people who are kind of more junior within a company, within industry, and they're driving and championing technology, they will only have a certain level of influence. So it will be interesting to see that figure, see how they get driven from a top-down perspective, but also a bottoms-up perspective.
Yeah, it depends on which field, who you're asking, what field are they from. If it's something like manufacturing and being in the industry, being in a factory, they might have very less use cases for AI for now.
Yeah, well, there's definitely more to it than those figures I've given you, and you can download the report from the newsletter. And there's quite a lot. It goes into quite a lot more detail. I don't think it actually does say the age range, which is a shame really, because it'd be interesting to see that. But it definitely goes into a bit more detail. But again, like you say, Rithwik, this kind of underlines other research that we've seen, but they do it in quite a fun way, and it's, I think, something that people can identify with. So it might be quite a good way of listeners kind of showing some of their colleagues around these different personas. I think they've kind of nailed it in a lot of ways. So the last story I wanted to run through before we get to the interview was one that came out towards the end of last week and moved quite quickly. So this was about LinkedIn. So LinkedIn have been apparently silently opting users into their new AI training program. And there's been lots of posts going around LinkedIn and other social media showing the button ticked saying yes, I agree to it. But then that moved quite quickly, and I think at least in the UK, LinkedIn had to halt it because the regulators got involved and told them to stop. So in some ways, not surprising because we've seen this a lot. But do you think this was intentional by LinkedIn, or is this an oversight, or did they just try and get away with it? Yoshi, what do you think?
I think it was intentional, and within the behavioral science kind of approach, this is something what you will call I think it's a dark mode choice, something, and it's where you intentionally set the default as something which is the option that people don't want to click, basically. And that's where you used to get in marketing quite a bit until the EU kind of stepped in and said you have to have regulation and you have to have opt-in as opposed to opt-out. They're just repeating the same cycle here because I think most people aren't going to want their data to be trained, right? So I would say that it's intentional in some aspect, and then they'll kind of play on the idea that you can opt out if you want to.
Yeah, but this is it's creating this two-tier system that we talked about. So now LinkedIn have had to wind it back in the UK, but I don't think they have elsewhere. It's just the UK. So we got to this point that Meta had to kind of stopped providing their Llama model to the EU. We are. Whilst I agree what the ICO have done, or the Information Commissioner's Office, they've had to step up to this. It's not right, but now next time LinkedIn do something, we're creating this barrier between the rest of the world and the UK. And we are in danger, I suppose, of a similar thing happening to the Llama model, where LinkedIn will just stop giving features to the EU or the UK because they're saying, well, you either play by our rules or you're not having our products. Yeah.
A question for you guys then. Would you be more concerned with a platform like LinkedIn doing this than you would something like Twitter or Facebook?
Well, I think they're all much of a muchness. I mean, don't forget LinkedIn are owned by Microsoft, right?
Well, I would say there's a slight difference though, because for me, in using Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it's a lot more personal. Within LinkedIn, I'm more likely to put a persona within a very formal persona that I have about my work, etc. So I'm less likely to be concerned about LinkedIn, I would say. But something more like Twitter and these places, I would be a lot more, because it's more the personal things that you talk about.
But have they specified what data are they using, to go public? I mean, to train any model.
It's just your posts. I think it's basically your post. Yeah, they're allowing. They're saying you're allowing them to train their model based on your posts. And I do understand your point, Yosha, because it's public information, but at the same time, that's still within an audience that you've agreed to connect to, isn't it? So the only people who can see your posts are the people you've connected to, or at least your full profile. But by opting you in to this, effectively they could be training a model on data that you might not want to get out to the whole wide world.
But how do you think they'll use it?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, obviously they're going to be training some kind of large language model, I would imagine.
I guess isn't there a feature on LinkedIn Premium to write posts?
That it can write posts. So actually, you could actually benefit from that, because if it's training data on those within your network, people obviously like you, that's why they're connected with you. If you can talk and engage with them on a similar level and you're being supported with the AI, that is probably for the betterment of you and your network. So there could be some of these more positive elements to it. And I mean, if they're using it to train some of their short video algorithms, that'd be even better, because we're seeing some crazy things on these shorts on LinkedIn. Yeah. It's not that in depth. So there could be the pros and cons of it.
Well, the other one is the big kind of monetization strategy for LinkedIn is the recruiters, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if they're training something to deliver for a fee to recruiters, trained on all of our information. It remains to be seen. And the point is they should just follow suit and allow people to opt in rather than doing this. So it was disappointing, really, to see that coming out, because all that stuff we saw with Facebook and back in the last election, Cambridge Analytica, we thought we were past that, but obviously not. And the companies are still going to try it. Yoshi, do you want to talk about, before we go on to the interview, do you want to talk about the event coming up, the ACOS-D event?
Yeah, so the ACOS-D have an event which precedes the Project Con Group's event on the 3rd of October, and it starts at 5 o'clock. And this is basically a welcoming to the community of practice leads for the ACOS-D. I myself are the digital community of practice lead for the ACOS-D. So I talk more about, data, digital AI within the space, and it's focused within project controls. So at this event, there'll be kind of a panel session or more of a discussion around demystifying AI within project controls, and it'll be discussion amongst everyone there. So there's quite a few attendees at the moment, but it's usually quite a good buzz with the ACOS-D events, followed by, Chirag's Project Con Group, and then after. So definitely turn up. It's in London, but it'd be good to actually see some faces there, and those who kind of listen to the podcast will be awesome.
Shame I can't make it that one, but I'll come to every other one, because they're always a really, really good fun evening and lots of interesting people to meet. Right, let's go on to the interview now with Philip Crocker. Before that, just want to say thank you, Rithwik, for coming on and sharing your expertise. It's great to have an actual expert on the show, rather than Yoshi and I talking about what we think we know about AI. So I do hope you'll come back and, for some more of these weekly pulse sessions.
Definitely, yeah.
So without any further ado, we're going to get on to the interview now with Phil Crocker. Welcome to the show, Phil. It's a real pleasure to have you on the Project Flux podcast.
Well, it's really good to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, I was lucky enough to be a guest on your podcast just a few days ago, really. So it's a real pleasure to be able to return the favour And I'll be looking forward to hearing how the podcast with you came out when it's released shortly.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's amazing.
I hope so. I did my best. To start with, can you briefly explain about OKRs, what OKRs are, and how they differ from sort of more traditional measures such as KPIs?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that they stand on the shoulders of all good management science. You know, Drucker, Peter Drucker, sort of in the 80s, was a guru. He's obviously still very influential. Said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I rather like that. And I think OKRs came from, the poster child of OKRs was Intel, who really needed to see off the opposition. They needed to do a moonshot focus, and they had an intern there who conducted the operation, which was that moonshot. What's the real objective? What are the key results we need to measure? What are the things that need to be in place to create the outcome of seeing off the competition whilst we get our house in order, really, which is what was going on. And he joined a venture capital business that was asked to go into this in the early 90s, this young tech business, about 50 people who were and they said, well, yeah, we'll invest in you, but you're going to have to use this system for clarifying what matters, focusing on it, and actually measuring our performance towards that. And that company adopted it big time, objectives and key results, and it's called Google.
Oh, what the hell they are?
And it's a good story anyway, and it is true. And now every person in Google has OKRs. They have every year. And the really important thing is that they align. So there's this idea of the outcome, the big outcome, the big things that matter to the organization this year in the context of who we are, where we're going. And they calibrate it a cadence of 3 monthly and 12 monthly. And it's what matters outcome-wise and what needs to be in place to support it. And I think that it's been picked up by the techie companies big time. And obviously others have adopted it. It's certainly coming into the UK. It's adopted in Germany, picked it up pretty early, and in the Far East.
Well, why do you think the tech companies were the first to pick it up?
Because I think that most tech companies are people who focus on things, and the big illumination is that the people are the people who do it, who do the things, but also choose the things to do.
Yes.
And that ultimately success in most organizations is really about the awareness that we work in people systems in a context of getting something done, getting from here to there. So, in the biggest sense as much as the shorter sense. So I think it's about focusing and having conversations around what matters. But 86% of implementations of OKRs fail. Just to sort of chip it up. Or they don't realize their potential. And that's because it's very simple OKRs, but the actual execution is less straightforward.
When they do succeed, like you say, the stories like Google, they make huge impacts. And, we're interested in this because we use it. Yoshi and I use it. We use it at Leeds, and we use it with Project Flux to drive what we're looking at. Because for me, it gives you a very real sense of purpose. It's like, what are you going for? And they are different to KPIs, because KPIs sometimes feel like a stick to beat you with, but OKRs are more inspiring. There's something to inspire yourself. That's the way that I kind of put it. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think you're right about the stick to beat you with, and a lot of people experience OKRs as, why haven't you done this? Why haven't that? Actually, what you're really looking for is better quality of conversations, better listening, better questions. Well, wonder why that's not working. I see you're not really achieving that key result you want, because you can do this across the organization, not just within silos. And you can offer the opportunity, which is the coaching piece, I think, is to say, how can I help? As opposed to pointing fingers about you're failing, we're not. And I think a big thing about OKRs, it reframes failure into learning. That's interesting. Right. Well, maybe we'll stop doing that. We'll do less of this. We'll do more of that. We'll start doing that.
Just Phil, with OKRs, having your experience within the field, have you seen that how people implement OKRs has evolved over time within the last few years, 5 years, 10 years? And if you do, what do you anticipate the future of OKRs to look like within the next 5 years?
I think that there's a really good question. Somebody I was talking to today who is very experienced in OKRs is a good friend of mine, and he reminded me of something. He says, "A fool with a tool is still a fool." Quite a nice soundbite that. So I don't think it's about it. I mean, OKRs is a framework, it's a methodology, and it does work. I got without doubts. But I think I had a couple of people on the podcast, my podcast, as a sort of three-way conversation like this the other day, and one is Mel Vessel, who's Dutch, and she put OKRs into Booking Doc, and the other person was Mark Richard, who's the very first one on my podcast. He's one of the world's top. He wouldn't say he's a very modest guy, but he's actually brilliant at OKRs. But he's got masses of experience. He's been MD, he's been there, he's got the T-shirt and all the rest of it. And one of the things that came out of that conversation, answering your question, Yoshi, eventually, was that they're becoming more flexible. So I said, does everyone in Booking.com use OKRs? And the answer is no. They use it where they feel it's most useful. And I think it's about being less rigid with stuff and being more sensitive to and more flexible, around. But the fundamental, we can't get away from that. We need good data in order to make good decisions. And we need to have a context of a direction where we're seeking to go, which is about the leadership of the organization. And often the leader's taking us somewhere we don't know. It's That's about true. The quality of connection with people, I think, which gives us influence with those people.
What you said there about, the data, because effectively what OKRs are, it provides some kind of data reference point. And I think that might be why a lot of the tech companies were driven to it, because obviously they're dealing in data. A lot of these kind of tools are data-driven tools. So it kind of aligns quite nicely with how they work. But kind of going on from Yoshi's point, Project Flux is very much around artificial intelligence and the impact that artificial intelligence is going to have on society and business. How do you think AI might augment the role of consulting and coaching and the use of OKRs?
Well, I think at one level it will terrify everybody, But I mean, that's a nonsense because it's new, Can you imagine what it was? I think what's going on, I observe, is that there's all these patterns, there's all these cycles with economic cycles of development and everything else. Some are much longer, some are so long you can't even see it's going on, like the patriarchal society influence is coming to an end, a lot of people would say, so that men are in charge and all. But I think that if you take the motor car, when it came out, what did everybody make of this smelly, noisy, thing that broke down all the time? Well, actually, some people thought it was the most exciting thing that's ever happened. And other people thought it was the worst thing that's ever happened. And I sort of feel, and by the way, it runs out of fuel. Oh, well, we'd better stick one on the running board sort of stuff. And I think that what's AI is a tool, and it's about making it useful. And somebody said on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, to drop a name in there, said about AI, said it needs good parenting.
Very good point. Yeah.
And I think, and that's about taking responsibility for it. So I think that where it's going to go to is, I think there's a lovely coupling of AI and OKRs. It's just not the only one, but that's one of them. Yeah. You can ask, you could actually just say, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing the other. Write me some OKRs. I don't know that would show you anything they didn't already know. The real skill is which ones, which are really relevant. What is this really telling us? And it's about the discernment. So I think that AI can see, and I'm by no means an expert, but I think they're an enabler to free us up to get it to do something it can do much better than we can, like, financial statements, reporting, all those things, which is seen as a threat, so that we can be more fully present to what is the data telling us, how might we use this to make better decisions for the whole system.
That's exactly how I see it working. And I know that in one of there's various OKR platforms out there, but there's a Microsoft one called Viva Goals, and they've got their Copilot on that. And I was a little bit underwhelmed with it, to be honest, because I don't think it's using it to, it does exactly what you say, Phil. It just helps you write the OKRs, but it's not giving you the reason why. And I think there's a real opportunity to use artificial intelligence to help with the strategic definition rather than just kind of writing some words in a chatbot type style without really understanding what it is, to start actually asking you questions, having that two-way conversation with AI, especially the new model that's come out from OpenAI that allows you to kind of delve in deeper in that kind of reasoning pattern. I can see a future where OKRs become not just something that a lot of people only look at once a quarter, but because AI is integrated to it, it will keep you updated, and it will be a conversation you can have with this agent, this OKR agent, that will help keep you on track. And that's something I think I'm quite excited about.
Yes, and I think that there's, because coaching is in here as well, because I mean, you have OKR coach, so that's not telling you what to do, it's to enable the organization to make better decisions to arrive at this for themselves. That's an enabler, effectively. And I think good use of AI is going to save time to enable us to. So you're going to get more from less, which is probably about productivity. It must be an opportunity. I know Tony Blair's going on about this in his institute thing, or I won't go there, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, I don't think on itself it's going to be the thing that's going to completely shift things. But I was talking to a colleague of mine who works in a significant bank, global bank, as an external coach and using OKRs. And their desired outcome, one of them, was it takes us 30 days to onboard a new customer. The competition can do it in, a day. Mm-hmm. So the desired outcome is to do it in a day, 28 days instead of 30 or 25, which is sort of incremental, absolute radical shift. And I think that actually is a good example of an OKR. And so they set that objective. They know the key results that need to be in place in order to support that objective. Now we've got to connect with everyone in the system to create willingness, to create, awareness, to say, well, we've always done it like this. Well, it's about, I call it conductivity. It's that quality of connection with people in the system to allow the flow to happen, which is usually experienced as, all right, well, we've always done it like that, but as soon as it's you, we'll give it a go.
When you say the system, you mean like the organisation or whoever's? Yes, yeah.
I mean all of it, actually. I mean, it's culture, it's traditions, it's processes, it's ways of doing things. All of that, because it's served them well to do it in 30 days. Well, why do we need to get it on? Because we've got to the competition. It's the Intel situation in a way, but it's not a tiny shift. That's what I really am trying to make. It's a huge
reinvention, thing, isn't it?
Which is more from less.
Yeah, absolutely.
OKRs gives you a connection to people and allows you to have some level of influence. Now, when I tried to understand the difference between AI and humans, right, what we do really well is to understand people. We understand social norms. We have a level of emotional intelligence, some level of wisdom, hopefully. And that, for me, is something that AI doesn't do well, right? It doesn't have qualia. It doesn't have this thing where it can understand people generally. So do you feel if you were to rely on AI to develop OKRs, do you think that it would overlook a lot of that human substance that allows us to connect with people?
Most definitely. And because, that knowing a metric and moving it from one to the other is part of an element in the whole of this complex. So what I think OKRs offers is a way, sort of an Einstein thought really, which is to enable the complex and to bring out simplicity from it. And I think that really good leadership influencers are able to take something that's extraordinarily complex and help communicate it effectively. So OKRs, I think, and I'm not alone, is broadly a communication tool, actually,
yes.
And it's totally contextual. And if I could pick up something else, and particularly, I know you're a neuroscientist in the context, that's a revelation, neuroscience, of what's going on in here, which is very new. It's, maybe 15 years of rigorous academic study of brain MRI scans in a laboratory condition. And I think that I work with some other colleagues, and we're talking about consciousness, really, because the trouble with neuroscience is it makes this clever bit of 86 billion synapses stuff.
Mhm.
That's the only, and it isn't. It's part of the system.
Yes.
The whole, and the sort of outcome of that is consciousness, about
Yes.
which we know diddly squat, to be honest with you. Whatever anybody says, it's a mystery, and that's amazing. I tell you what, we know when it's not there. So there's a good school of conscious leadership coming out of the States and elsewhere, which is saying as you get to 200 hertz of frequency, we begin to let go of the binary, which is winners and losers. I'm right, therefore you must be wrong unless you agree with me stuff. You may have seen that in the press recently. 65% of the planet going to the elections this year.
It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
Extraordinary, really. And that could be influenced in different ways. But as you get above 200, you get to a place where basically we can begin to push through paradox. It's about it's not right or wrong, because that's inadequate. It's about listening. I'm in the room with you, completely disagree with you. Accounts as much more important than sales, or whatever it is, that sort of conversation that's going on, but enable a safe space. To me, this is coaching, to be heard, to listen, to influence, to push through, to say, well, know what we know now. Maybe we will just, we'll stop calling each other's names or whatever, and it will probably be, and it's about respect. Now, that word is bandied about a lot, but I think the interesting thing, I've got Simon Fanshawe on my podcast this week. He's going on. He was one of the founding members of Stonewall.
Okay.
So, which most people think was all about gay or whatever. It isn't really. What they were trying to attack was unfairness.
Yes.
Is it fair that this group of people, if somebody died, they were going to be disinherited? And it was a fundamental unfairness that they were addressing, and that's what they focused on. Most people agreed it was unfair. So you find a common ground and you try and grow it. And I think that's what OKRs offers. I think that's what AI offers, in the sense of, well, let's see what it says. And then the skill is the discernment about whether it's useful or not.
And it's funny you brought up consciousness, because I'm actually reading a book at the moment called Consciousness is All There Is, which is quite deep, and it talks about this understanding we're looking at things the wrong way around. Actually, consciousness kind of dictates everything and all of our experiences. And I think it's quite, and it's brilliant, because it really, the kind of advances that we're having with AI, you can start seeing parallels there, like the way that the AI is advancing. And the fact that nothing is quite as it seems, and things are moving in a very, very different direction than a lot of people thought. For example, when AI first reared its head, people thought it would take a lot of kind of the manual jobs, and the creative arts would never be touched. AI would never be able to write a song or do graphic design or do things like that. Actually, that's the first thing it's gone for. It's really having a huge impact in those industries already. So it kind of makes you realize that there isn't a straight line here. There is no kind of, it's very, very difficult. And Yoshi and I say this all the time. It's very difficult to predict where AI is going to be, even in 3 years' time. But if you start going to sort of the 10-year horizon, it becomes almost impossible.
But this to me highlights the complexity of OKRs, though, and why I believe that humans have a big role to play within OKRs. Because, like I mentioned, the one thing that AI misses to me is meta-learning and meta-cognition, right? So it's the ability to learn how to learn and the ability to think about thinking. And I feel, for me, AI struggles with those things, but with OKRs, like you mentioned, Phil, there's a lot to learn from an OKR. And learning itself in terms of OKRs and other different approaches in that helps you to learn differently. And then thinking about OKRs helps you to also think about how you thought about the OKRs when you have introspection and when you reflect. And this is where I feel like humans have this position where they're able to have that level of meta learning and metacognition, which AI hasn't got. And that's why I'm pushing the idea about, connectedness, is that we understand people. We have this personal context and this qualia, which is our subjective experience, which allows us to connect, and it gives meaning to the OKRs. in that sense. And I think that kind of sums it up quite nicely in my head.
And I think the word you just said there, meaning, I think is we are meaning. The brain is a meaning-seeking bit of kit. What's that all about? And it is very binary, because if it doesn't agree with you, it's gonna, so it's the saber-tooth tiger. We know this, and actually it's probably experienced mostly in the ego, I would suggest to you, which is it's all about me. And the truth is, it isn't all about me, because anything that's meaningful must embrace the other or the other person. And I think that it's about being able, but we've been taught to be right. This isn't anything else. It's our education system and our parenting is teaches us to be right. That's yellow. No, it's blue. No, it's yellow. Oh, right, okay. And I can please you if I give you the answer you want. Oh, right, that's called a democratic election, Or if you sort of follow this. And what's happening is, I think it's about maybe there's something else going on here, and being more curious, and being around. We've only got 10 minutes, so should we? So there's sort of is putting boundaries, and I think that OKRs does offer that framework of discipline, cadence, but ultimately the successful ones, if you look at the ones that really the applications where they were very successful, is because the humans, to pick up Yoshi's point, have far better quality of connection, rapport. I call it conductivity, which is from quantum mechanics. Everything's connected with energy. It's to allow that energy to flow, and it's grounded in what matters, and what human beings need. There's so many distractions, as we know, for these and everything else. So to have focus, I think, is a really powerful thing. And I think actually, funny enough, I think OKR, AI, my limited experience of it is that ask it a question and it comes back and it's bollocks, basically. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but it is nonsense. But it's nonsense, so you ask a better question.
Well, that's it. It's like you've got to have the conversation. But you also mentioned something interesting about ego. So I think what I've experienced is a lot of people's ego comes into play when you ask them to give their thoughts about AI. And I know you coach a lot of leaders, Phil, and I'll be interested to know your views about that. Do you see some leaders whose ego gets in the way of them looking at the potential of AI, whereas other leaders who have got a more kind of controlled ego can see the potential when they start looking at it?
Well, I think we've got to be kind to the ego. The ego is there for a purpose. It's the boundaries, it's the container, which we can begin to build, on what is, etc. And I think who we really are is about where we just say, thank you very much, ego, for showing me that as a threat. Because that's how a lot of these people, you're asking me to sign off $4 billion investment in the IT, and they go, so what they need is the data, if you like. They need the meta position in the bigger picture to see it in perspective, such that they can do it. But I do think that, my podcast is sort of focused at the third age of life. So it's those who've done their business, they as a career, or they come out and they're saying, I've got 30 years left. What am I going to do with it? I think that's a fascinating thing, because we didn't used to live that long. We used to peg it after most people pegged within 4 years, actually, of retirement. So
it's a scary statistic.
Is, if you look at the Eastern traditions, they see a retirement as a place of, I'm wise. But it's in service of the whole system. So the younger people who have been, educated, socialized with these very naturally, there's no broad fear around that. But, maybe there's one or two things they don't know, could be possible. And the middle trying to keep the train on the track and all the rest of it. So I think it's about helping the whole piece work together. And I think that is new, actually, because typically, for example, the who gets coached up there, I would suggest they're the last people who need any coaching. What they probably need is some support in being better bosses or better mentors to the system. And the people who are going through transitions, within the system to a new job, or going from expert to now growing a team to create new outcomes, they probably need some more coaching, which is a blend of May I make a suggestion? That's
Go
called
for it.
consulting, and you're asking permission. But it's that quality of connection in that space that enshrines how you experience it. My goodness, that was fun. I like, and you mean I learned something and it was fun? Well, I'm sorry. And when I was at school, it had to be painful to learn anything, but the
Yeah.
bit that's painful is unlearning,
Yes, absolutely. And it gets harder and harder as you get
especially
older.
for this bit.
Yeah.
What I
Literally.
think is really interesting is that, especially with the rise of technology and how fast things are moving, including AI technology, the people who need the most coaching are the people entering the workspace, because it's quite a daunting space for them. They have a huge amount of social change to deal with, then technological change, and also, as you say, the kind of people going on longer now. So the kind of path to a career is much, much harder. And I think, I think back to when I started my career about 25 years ago. I think it's a lot different now for people entering the workspace. What advice would you give to them, Phil?
I find good mentors. I mean, in any coaching intervention that I work with, I always encourage. I mean, coaching is about, I run 100 meters in 9.6 seconds and I want to run it in 9.2 seconds.
Mm.
So this comes from sport anyway. That's where it all came from originally, and it's put into the workplace and the armed services actually initially. And I want to run it at 9.2 seconds. So if I keep doing the same thing, expect a different outcome, that's probably a definition of madness. And actually, the challenge, and I don't think it's specific to the young, although it's often sort of shoved on them, as there's that we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly.
And we're doing. But when we create a quality of connection between people in the people system whereby they are respected, and respect, by the way, means to look again. Actually, as I go above 200, I think, God, this person really annoys me. They remind me of my mother, whatever. And I'm aware of it. And I choose not to take offence. I think, God, that's just reminding me of my mother. That's all that is.
Poor Mrs. Crocker, we don't want to drag her into this.
But you know what I'm saying? I'm sorry, and my father or whatever. I'm not trying to be one. But all I'm getting at is it's. I think we don't know what we don't know. So a lot of young people, why on earth would I need to ask somebody else for some? That it doesn't occur to them, because what I'm used to is being told what to spew back at university from my learning or whatever. And this is a place of I actually don't know.
Yeah.
How about we have a conversation about what do we learn? What shall we try? What shall we? And I think that's maybe better in groups. So action learning sets groups of teams. Is a place of learning, and there are people without doubt who have experienced trauma. We know much more about PTSD and on these things, and they get triggered by all sorts of things. And so alongside the group, I think sometimes the individual might need some support as well to basically, usually it's that little voice that stands on your shoulder and says, who the hell do you think you are to do this? Which is called imposter syndrome by some people. And it's about learning to say, look, I welcome you, because I could fall flat on my face if I don't see that banana skin. Thank you, now shut up.
And I think a lot of it's also... Sorry, Phil.
No, I'm just saying, so it's about mastering one's demons or one's...
Yeah. Well,
which
I think
is
it's
usually
culture.
this.
It's definitely this, absolutely 100%. And I think we all suffer from that. And I think also this kind of culture of individual freedom, whilst it's great in some senses, I think a lot of young people don't have that sense of belonging to a group or a tribe, and they think they've got to go it alone, but they don't. And that's the kind of message that I
this is running a I'm on my own belief.
It is, yeah.
And it's just not true.
No, but society definitely has moved, certainly, in the last 50 years, and we've lost that kind of way of working in groups, whatever your tribe is, whether it's
lost connectivity.
Yeah, exactly. That goes back to exactly what we said, the connectivity.
But belonging is really right. I think it's about where can I belong. I mean, life is about adventure, isn't it? Life is about life, whereas we tend to turn it into a thing. I've got my 2-1 and da-da-da, and I've done my apprenticeship or whatever it is one's got. And because there is a belief that education stops at university. Well, I would suggest the minute you stop learning, you're dead.
Absolutely. I would say that all my learning happened after. That was a means to an end. And
Yeah, but you're a rebel, James. You know this.
I wouldn't say that.
Basically a troublemaker, trouble in the waters.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Definitely a troublemaker.
That's another thing, guys, with humans and AI, is that AI itself is trained on predefined parameters and questions, and it's task orientated, right? Which means that in comparison to us humans, we are continuously learning, and we do that through experiences and perception. We don't need to be conscious that we're learning new things. It just happens. And I think that itself is a very powerful thing in how you approach life, but also in how you approach things like OKRs. So it gives you a new method of questioning because you see things without having to be conscious about it. With AI in itself, you have to guide it. Supervised learning is one of the biggest things within deep learning and AI, right? So it is fascinating as you go along how you pick these things up and how you can make use of it.
But I think the other thing that I'm noticing and talking with other colleagues and peers and about this is that, we know fundamentally human beings are asleep. We're running on automatic. You talk about AI, but we run on 95% of our operation is unconscious. 5% is, so there is an interface between being aware and not aware. And I think that, to my mind, would be a really useful thing for a conversation to have, and just become aware. Oh goodness me, I always do it like that. Why do I do it like that? Be more curious and actually, why don't I like that person? Why don't I like mustard? Why don't I? Well, they're all learned.
Yeah, it's where creatures of
habit.
habit.
I think that's a really liberating thought. That wow. So I don't have to be. I don't have to hate fish. Or whatever it is. Where did I learn that? And that probably requires some good questions. And I think that's why coaching throughout the people system is really valuable. But if we were going to say where, I think a really good place to really focus this is on those coming in, as you say. Yeah. And I'm talking to some other colleagues who are working on a program which will just take people through. And I think probably undergraduates is a good place to do it, but it could be sixth form as well. Just around all the stuff Yoshi, around neuroscience and consciousness, and actually show people that this is actually what's going on, because it's not taught, and it's not about psychology, to be honest with you, because that's all about this.
Yeah.
What we want to learn about is this. What's this telling us?
Yeah.
When we connect this with this. And then we think, well, okay, knowing what I know now, what am I going to do about it? So that's OKRs. And it's actually I think when we know what to do, it unlocks something that flows, which is usually learning, actually, I think, which is good. But I just think these tools that if you think what our lives are like, and potentially in comparison with not that long ago, 50 years ago, it is unbelievably how enabled potentially we are, but we tend to often squander our time on Netflix.
Well, if you look at it in that time scale, it would look like magic, the progress that we've made. But there was some vastly informative information there. But we have reached the end of the podcast, I'm afraid, Phil. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Before we go, can you tell the listeners where they can find out more about you and your coaching and where they can find your website?
I don't know. Did you put that in the notes on
I'll put it in the notes for sure. But
if you put my website, philipcrocker.com, there's also links to the podcast. There's a very wide breadth of conversations. There's probably something that's interesting. But I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's been a really good opportunity to share. I think this format is really is fun, but it's a very efficient way to learn, I think, about things, or to point you into another direction to go and inquire.
Well, it's brilliant to have you on, and the whole point of this is to have different perspectives on the use of AI, and we try to address the kind of the human side of it, and you've brought some fantastic insights for the listeners, so really grateful for you coming on.
Can I just offer one tiny thing on that?
Well, I was going to say that, do you have any last comments? So
the only thing I would say is, and this isn't just mine, is I just think with AI, as we use AI in conjunction with coaching or OKRs, we have to be aware of confidentiality. I think that I don't believe we need to anonymize the data going in, because it will pick it up and it'll come out somewhere else. So I just think there's a need to be conscious of confidentiality actually about that, and it doesn't need to know who,
No.
if you know what I mean. As long as it's got of course we do, and our ego, because I'm working with Google or whatever it is, and I think we have to be a bit careful of that. So
it's very topical, and we do bring it up pretty much every week. And actually, on the show before this, when Yoshi and I go through the news, there was a big story that hit around LinkedIn, who nearly everyone uses, silently opting people in to training their model. So, this is happening this isn't just the small companies. These are the biggest firms. LinkedIn, owned by Microsoft, are doing what I would say are unethical things in just silently opting people into training their models with their confidential data. So it is a very, very important point, and actually a very good point to end the podcast on. With everything we talk about, confidentiality, ethics are key to this. Otherwise, we are potentially raising a monster, in terms of AI. And we have to be very, very careful about how we allow this incredible technology. We're huge proponents. It is like magic, but there are huge risks, and you raise a really important point there. But until next week, everyone, have a great week, and thank you again, Phil, for coming on.
Great pleasure.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want, so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.
See you later, everyone.